As I started here, I was given this quote, and I wanted to go read it. I think it's probably in the proceedings, and maybe a lot of you have had a chance to, but I'm going to read through it quickly. Conservation planning is not primarily a matter of laws, appropriations, or administrative devices, but rather of modifying land use, hence, execution of a plan rests largely with the landowners rather than the government. The function of government is to teach, to lead, and to encourage. To teach, to lead, and to encourage. About 30 years ago, or 35, we had a veterinarian on the ranch that I was taking around, and he asked me, he said, what would be ideal pasture size and watering systems on your ranch? And at that time, I think maybe we still had some 4, but certainly some 2-section pastures. And I said, ideal would be 1 section with 2 windmills. It wasn't too long after that, maybe a year and a half, my brother and I were meeting with NRCS, with Sheila Loma, and she said, would you guys think about putting pipeline on your ranch? And we said, well, we really didn't think we would. It wasn't too many years after that we started putting pipeline on our ranch. And now the entire ranch is watered with pipeline. I think we were led, we were taught, and we were encouraged. What I'm going to do briefly here today is talk a little bit about the Buell family, how that progressed through the years with our different generations. A little primer on the Sandhills for you that are not familiar with that area. Also, a little bit about our present operation, and then move into the partnerships that we've had that have helped us along the way, and then really kind of zero in on the Sandhills Task Force, which is something that we've worked with as well as I'm on that board, have been for the last 3 years. Most of you, if I say Benjamin Franklin, what comes to mind? It's probably the founding father, one of the founding fathers of our nation, but to me, it's Benjamin Franklin Buell. And Benjamin Franklin Buell was a cigar maker in Michigan. At a young age of around 21, as near as we can tell, he came across the midsection of the United States onto Washington State. And once he got to Washington State, he worked as a timekeeper and a bookkeeper in a logging camp. And we think that, without a doubt, the vastness, something in the Sandhills, I mean, think about it, back in those times, to go from Michigan through Nebraska, clear to Washington State, and then come back. Something dreamed back. And I think it was something in the Sandhills, without a doubt. When he got back, he lived for about a year, about 5 or 10 miles north of where our ranch, where he homesteaded. He met his future bride, Harriet, while she was visiting from Pennsylvania. We always think it was kind of neat before they got married. Once they would have only been able to do a single homestead. But they both filed a claim before they were married. So they were businessmen and businesswomen even at that time. Benjamin was I think he was a conservationist. He had a love for the land. He was a hunter. He liked to fish. One of the things that he always wanted to do in his lifetime and was never able to was to build a lake along the Calamus River. It happened in the 1940s. My father and my grandfather were able to divert the Calamus River. We had a natural oxbow, and they built 3 different lakes there, and then had the Calamus River straightened out. That'd be hard to do in this day and age with the DEQ and whatnot, but they were able to do that, and to this day, that's really a nice recreation area for a family. Homer and Cecilia. Homer is my grandfather. My dad, Bernard, and my mother, Susan, they, I think, inherited a lot of the conservationists in them, came from Benjamin, but they were also cattle producers. They had, I think, a vision of the cattle industry in Nebraska, helped to develop that through the years. But they were also, as was Benjamin, avid fishermen, hunters and fishermen. The ranch at the present time is operated by, well, I'll tell you, when we put in for this award, we did it as the Buell family. For a lot of different reasons, which I won't get into today, but for succession purposes in 2009, my brother and I split the ranch. And for the award, we put in our whole family. So it was operated for a number of years by Larry and I and Darla and Nick. Tremendous partnership that we had through that time. Larry and I are different, and I was always the one that liked to go to meetings and that type of thing. Larry liked to stay on the ranch, but I think the synergy that we had together is really what made our ranch successful. Here's a little map of Nebraska. Our ranch is located right up here in the Loop, Blaine, just a little bit in Blaine, and up into Rock County. We're kind of on the eastern edge of the Sandhills. The Sandhills kind of stretch up here through Cherry County, back down around and back through this area. It's almost 1/4 of Nebraska is made up of the Sandhills, roughly 20,000 square miles. A huge area. You know, some differences on how that actually formed. Some think it the Ice Age, the last Ice Age, was formed during that period. Others think during a desert time, strong northerly winds blew up the dunes. But in either case, it's quite and one of the largest, I think if not the largest, contiguous tallgrass prairies in the United States. This is the first map to the right was Rock County. That's how we divide up our pastures down in Loop County. Now this is just a picture of most of what our ranch looks like. It's kind of, you know, on the eastern edge of the Sandhills where we are, it's more of a choppy hills, dunes covered with tall grass. A lot of our flats in between those dunes are not really a lot of water, of sub-irrigated. Now you get western part of Nebraska and some of those sand hills, they're a little bigger, a little more rolling, and probably more in that flat ground, really sub-irrigated and a lot of water. At the present time, we choose to harvest most of everything, our natural resources with cattle. We do put up a little bit of hay, which is used in our backgrounding operation. This is a picture of the cow-calf herd, part of them, taken this last winter. We had, with the drought, I mean, normally our cattle pretty much graze year-round, but because of the drought, we had to hay, or quite a few of the cows were at cornfields in the southern part of the state. Our backgrounding operation, that's where most of our hay goes. It's put up. We also use ethanol byproducts there. We also run our yearling operation, which is what we define as what we take into the summer. And then we sell those cattle in July and August. I had probably late 80s. We worked with a veterinarian in Buell who later started a business called Management Information Systems. And I wanted to start something in our grazing management that would really be able to measure what we were getting done and what kind of effect we were having on the land. You know, to start with, we did some stuff visually. We'd worked with the NRCS and kept track of AUMs and that type of thing. But my brother and I, Larry first, went to an HRM school. And I think one of the presenters this morning talked about HRM and the effect it had on their operation. It certainly had a big effect on ours. I had, a couple years after Larry had went, I went to a school here in Lincoln and came away from that. A group of us decided to start a ranch management club. And the things that we met 4 times a year, and different people in the club were in charge of what we did. But it certainly, we learned a lot from the other fellow ranchers, and that had a big effect on how we managed the land. A grazing consultant, we worked with a grazing consultant for a few years, and he helped us along as well. But the grazing manager probably had the biggest effect. And Dr. DeGroff, Management Information Systems, had found a program at Texas A&M. It was a DOS program in the 90s, and it really looked like to us something that we could use to plan our grazing, and then after we had planned the grazing, to go ahead and enter information in there historically, and then would really know over time what we were getting done, what type of effect we were having on the land. Here's a couple of graphs. Now, it may be hard for you to see, but one of the good things about Grazing Manager is you can adjust your forage growth. You can go in there like this last summer when we had a shortage of rain, adjust according to the way you think the growth would be, and then develop your plan with that in use. So, really good tool. Down at the bottom, you can go in as you do your planning and put in, now there's a lot of inputs before you start. You have to put in, the cattle sizes, what stage of lactation, your pastures have to all be entered as far as pasture size, how many acres, how many animal units are available per acre. So there's a lot of inputs. As we did that, we took probably 3 to 4 years to really get that set, to make sure we had it right. Then we froze that. So any change that we would see in forage availability or forage use would affect what we're doing with our grazing practices. Here's another, this is just an example of the grazing schedules by herd that we set up. You put in, what animals you have, if you've got cows, what weight the calves are, dates in, dates out, and then track them through the summer. We usually, in late winter, will set up a plan that pardon? Oh, okay. We usually have a plan that goes through early fall, and then we'll adjust and replan as we move into the rest of the year through our winter grazing. Here's some water development. That's been important to us for our being able to run the groups and sizes and pastures that we've wanted. Just to grant, that's watered by pipeline. Cross fencing, this is just a single wire fence. We do have a lot of 2-wire electric that we put in. Original fence on the ranch was mostly barbed wire. I mentioned a little bit earlier about my grandfather and dad were really hunters, and Benjamin as well, and the lakes that we built. But this is a picture taken in, it would have been early winter. I think you can see there's some ice on the lake. We have a tremendous number of waterfowl that come in there. Those are the geese. Sometimes we'll have up to 2,500 at a time. We have swans, various other species. We have that entire area around there fenced off, and then don't allow any hunting or anything. It's just kind of as a preserve. We do have a cabin right over here that we use to entertain friends and family as well. This is an area, and I'll talk about it a little bit more a little later, but this is an area where we have fenced off along the Calamus River for a mile on both sides to promote some new species or pheasants and different wildlife in that area. Here's some creeks up by my brothers that we don't hay along there just to provide some cover and whatnot for wildlife. Our partners, teaching, leading, and encouraging. The Natural Resource Conservation Service was the first group that we worked with a lot and were very helpful to us. The Great Plains contracts, the Conservation Stewardship Program is something we've done in recent years, and I think gives some more good ideas on how to monitor your grazing and what you're getting done, because I think the monitoring is extremely important. University of Nebraska. I testified a few years ago for the University of Nebraska in the budget hearing at the state legislature, and I told them that day they have, some of the research they've done, they've got 2 ranches here in Nebraska, one on the western part of the state, and then another just north of us. And they've done research, grazing, monitoring, all types of things that have really made our ranch thousands of dollars. Very helpful. Soil Conservation Service as well. I want to move into the Sandhills Task Force. It would have been, well, let me go back a little. The Sandhills Task Force, I think too often in our industry, landowners like myself or you, and you take different private conservation groups, government agencies, we oftentimes don't have the trust, have some misunderstanding, probably because of lack of communication. In the early 90s here in Nebraska, 2 individuals, as near as I can tell, started it, but Gene Mack with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife and Dean Sedgey with the Nebraska Cattlemen were 2 far-sighted individuals that said, we've got to work together. We have too many shared goals, shared visions that we don't know about, and that we can work together and accomplish that. So with that in mind, there's more people from NRCS, the RC&D, various agencies, the Game and Parks, Nature Conservancy, and then a group of ranchers started the Sandhill Task Force. And I'm going to read you, we've done some strategic planning just in the last year, and this is the vision statement that we have. And intact, now when you think about vision statements, I mean, for me, you close your eyes and think, what do you want that prairie, that grassland to look like? And this was it. An intact rolling prairie landscape intermixed with wetlands, meadows, and streams, where diverse and native plant and animal life prospers along with robust communities supported by a thriving ranching economy. I think there's a lot of key words in there, but we want it a rolling prairie landscape to be natural, but it'll have those wetlands and meadows and streams, but that's all kind of centered around a thriving ranching economy. The mission statement: to partner with Sandhills ranchers, local communities, groups, and organizations, and local, state, and federal agencies to identify, prioritize, plan, and implement mutually acceptable projects. It would have been probably 12 years ago. I was in church one morning, and Game and Parks, Bill Votenall was a member of our church, and he and I got to visiting about, I said, you know, I've got an area on the river where we don't have any pheasants anymore. We used to have a lot of pheasants in that area. And he said, well, why don't you work with Sandhills Task Force? And I really wasn't that familiar with them at that time, but he started the thing in motion, and it ended up, we fenced off a mile of river. We put in other watering systems because the cattle had watered there before, and then helped to develop some grazing plans around that area. It was, you know, we brought in some pheasants and things to try to help that process along. But we paid for a third, Sandhills Task Force paid for a third, and Game and Parks paid for a third. But it was a project working together with these agencies that was good for us, was good for them. It met both our goals. The Sandhills Task Force, the projects, I'll just go down to the bottom. Its contribution to projects from the task force itself have been $1.2 million. And you can see, you know, the different counties. We're here in Loop County, and we'd be one of those. But I mean, there's a lot of dollars have been put out there, and have just to help promote the goals that we have, but also help private landowners like ourselves, other ranchers, meet our goals as well. To wrap things up, I put these 2 pictures here. One is another picture of the Sandhills, and this is what our family, what I like to see. I mean, you've got a robust prairie with native grasses, cool season, warm seasons. I mean, that's pretty much ideal. I think groups like the Sandhills Task Force and other agencies have helped us promote that. And part of the reason, well, a lot of the reason that we do and what I like to see something like that is because of the next generation. This picture was taken at our branding this last year. It's a couple of my grandchildren, 2 or 3 of Larry's, and then my son on there as well. But many of us in agriculture, most of us that have had this land for generations, we want to pass it on to the next. And if we can have land like this that's productive, that's healthy, that's viable, then we can pass that on to the next generation. We are so lucky, and I've told other people this, we can do the right thing. We can have land like that. If we're in it for the long term, that's what we have to do. And we can do that and be profitable and then pass that to the next generation. We are lucky. Thank you.